Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Superman 3 from 1983. Superman 3 comes after two films pretty much directed by Richard Donner. Richard Lester was credited with Superman 2, but most of the stuff people really like is actually directed by Richard Donner, and he wasn't credited. Although Richard Lester did actually have some better sequences, better than anything in this movie, in Superman 2. Now, this was entirely Richard Lester. They obviously weren't going to get Richard Donner back, and the whole interpretation of the character by Alexander Salkind and Ilya Salkind had really come to fruition after Richard Donner and Tom Mankiewicz had completely rewritten their scripts because apparently they totally sucked and tried to make them better and made two Superman movies that really captured the public's imagination. Superman the movie and Superman 2 were huge hits and people really loved them. And then Superman 3 comes along and is boring and doesn't make a lot of sense and has tangents that don't go anywhere and has way too much information and is way too long and is a huge mess and waste of time. And I think a lot of people were thoroughly disappointed and really sick of the Christopher Reeve Superman franchise at that point. Now, they probably knew it wasn't going to be great with the posters of Superman flying around with Richard Pryor, which don't make you think of a really great Superman movie. They make you think of a bizarre kind of buddy comedy that you think is kind of a joke and seems kind of awful. And that's really what happened. This has too many ideas. Is it about the fear of computers and computers being the villain? Is it that Richard Pryor is more of the star of it? Is it the Superman gets transformed into an evil Superman? There's all these just kind of bizarre things all mixed together. It feels like there's too many cooks in the kitchen, and the initial cooks left, and then the other cooks came in and they started baking something else, even though the initial thing they were making turned into something else, but it just comes out like gobbledygook, like they thought they're making a souffle or a cake, and then someone said, no, we're making a soup. Someone else is like, no, we're making a sandwich, and you're like, what the hell even is this? No one eat this. You will die or just have food poisoning for like forever. It's not that there's a million credited screenwriters, it's just David Newman and Leslie Newman, who apparently did try to write earlier drafts of Superman movies that were considered awful by Tom Mankiewicz and Richard Donner, whose opinions I trust a lot more than anyone creatively involved in this pile of shit. It's kind of the typical thing with a superhero sequel. Instead of having too many characters, it's really just too many ideas going on, but too many different ideas, and that none of them really get to fully come to fruition. So it's really a boring, bland mess of visual images going on throughout it that you're not sure how to connect, and then it just kind of ends and you're like, oh, okay, I think I don't like Superman anymore. And that was pretty much how the public felt after watching this one. Richard Pryor's character of Gus Gorman, who has been unemployed for 36 weeks and he can't find a job, and he decides he can get into computers and really quickly realizes he's very good at it, and then finds out if he takes half a cent from everyone's paycheck or something like that, he can become very rich, which is like what they did in Office Space. Then the boss of the company decides that he should hire Richard Pryor's character to help him do nefarious plans because he's so good at computers, rather than fire him or take him to the police, because Richard Pryor's character made about $82,000 from doing that scam. And then they get him to control a weather satellite so that that weather satellite can make bad weather conditions to ruin the sale of coffee beans from Colombia, and then find out how to make kryptonite, and eventually find a way to mark up the price of oil, while Superman goes back to Smallville for his high school reunion, and then starts going out with Lana Lang, and then starts becoming evil after they analyze kryptonite and can't find one of the minerals that's not found on Earth, so they make their own, and that of course makes Superman evil, and he has to defeat them and become good again, and probably something else. This movie's a mess. I don't know. You know, Richard Pryor's there, and they build a supercomputer, and yeah. So this movie's hard to describe. You know how most movies you can be like, hey, that movie's about this thing and this other thing, and that's what it is. And you go, oh, cool, I'll watch that. Superman 3 is probably easily described as, hey, that's that movie with Richard Pryor and Superman, because getting into it is like nearly impossible to understand the fuck was going on in this movie. It does have a fear of technology, which is interesting because it feels like no one in the film really understands technology, and I think a lot of people didn't because it was more higher end then. It wasn't as easy to understand. Not not everyone had a computer, and technology was certainly taking hold. So that's kind of an interesting idea. Apparently, originally they were going to have Brainiac and Supergirl be in this movie, and they decided not to, and instead have like a bunch of boring regular people who want to control the price of oil and stuff, because kids love that. It probably should have had supervillains like Superman 2. That seemed to be a really interesting concept with General Zod. And Superman 3, it's just like, okay, they're doing stuff with computers because that's an enemy Superman can fight. It just doesn't really make a lot of sense. And that's maybe like the surface level. To really complain about everything in this movie, you'd need an hour-long video and go piece by piece, and really there are that many problems with it. The thing that's weird about this film is probably Richard Lester's direction, who had done things like The Hard Day's Night and done a lot of British comedy, and then why he was put in charge of Superman, mostly because these producers liked working with him from their Three Musketeers movies. But he doesn't really work for this film. They make Superman rather goofy and silly. It almost feels like Silver Age Superman comics. And a lot of the gags he does work with this movie, where there's a lot of details that never really come to the fruition of the gag. A gag kind of has to lead somewhere to have a punchline. He has a lot of just goofy shit going on. It feels like Tati, but someone who doesn't really understand how Jacques Tati works, thinking if you just have a bunch of goofy, bizarre things, it'll somehow be somewhat artistic and interesting. But for Richard Lester, it just comes off as like, why are these things connected? I don't even understand. Sometimes he has cuts to things, or like, was that was a joke, or what story are you exactly telling through this? And I don't think he really knew. I feel like he liked Fellini, but didn't really get how Fellini could work, especially in a Superman movie, which I don't understand why that makes any sense. Or at least in the movie, it feels like a failure of style and comedy with Superman. I mean, the opening sequence, instead of having it in space, it has this long slapstick sequence where like this blind guy loses his seeing eye dog and then is chasing around like one of those machines that makes lines in the road. Superman didn't stop that guy. It just kind of ends at a certain point. And there's all these wacky shenanigans, like all these telephone boxes fall over and all this stuff, and you see like some characters who are in later parts of the movie in it, but most of them are like just random people. And having the credits over that, I was like, what the hell is this? There was one joke with a mime. Felt like he was so worried about this not being funny, but he also kind of didn't really understand the comedic timing of anyone else within the film. He didn't cast it for his own sensibilities. Richard Pryor is one of probably the greatest comics of all time, and the fact that he's just not funny in this movie at all speaks volumes about Richard Lester. I think he highlighted how funny the Beatles could be in A Hard Day's Night, and I've seen him work with other people and make them very funny. But then when you watch Superman 3, you're like, how was Richard Pryor this unfunny? It's like kind of remarkable. Apparently Richard Pryor knew the script sucked. He knew it was a bad movie, but they offered him $5 million, so he did it. I'm not gonna fault Richard Pryor for that, but apparently he did know what he was getting into. But there's like a sequence where he's wearing all pink and he skis off a rooftop and down a building. It was like, that's supposed to be thrilling or funny or stupid or make me think something about his character. It doesn't even come back or have anything to do with the story oftentimes. It's like, look at this hilarious gag, and you're like, what the hell was that? The thing with Superman becoming evil especially doesn't work, because if you watch Superman 2, him becoming mortal makes sense, because it's something about him being Superman is he'll never really be like a human. You know, he's always an alien from Krypton. In Superman 3, him being evil doesn't really work with the themes of the film. I think that's probably one of the biggest problems with this movie. It has no theme running throughout it. It's not really about anything, really. It's about too many things that it's about nothing. Having Superman become evil is never really worked out in such a way. I think Christopher Reeves gives a really good performance in a really terrible movie. Christopher Reeves will probably always go down as the best Superman, but one of the reasons he is considered the best Superman is he's a Superman you can relate to, but it was such a good charismatic performance. He's so charismatic. He's kind of like screwball comedy kind of Clark Kent, and how good and honest he is as Superman. There's just such an amazing honesty to all that throughout it, but you're just so with him throughout the entire film. He's perfect for a lead in these films, because you really need an actor who can actually do something with a part that there's nothing really to do with on the page, and I think Christopher Reeves is really, really good at that. And even in trash like this, he manages to get it to work with all the dark Superman nonsense that's going on throughout it. I mean, it's like he does play it better than I think most actors could. Why have Superman change again. We had that in the last movie. And this goes into two things really about Hollywood sequels is superhero movies always like to have a sequel about powers, whether it's Iron Man 2, X-Men 1, and X-Men 3. It seems to be a particular sticking point to Hollywood screenwriters go, no, let's have something with their powers. People are obsessed that this person has powers and all this stuff, and it becomes very annoying, but it's also that you have him repeating the same idea from the last film. That's always something that people criticize sequels for, are being the exact same movie again, and it feels like that just not done as well. I think also Richard Lester just has action sequences throughout it. There's a sequence at a chemical plant that like they bring up and they have come back in some ways, but has no really dramatic bearings on anything. It's not like the villains did it as like a test, or Richard Pryor accidentally hit a button and he started a fire on a computer. It really doesn't really mix into the plot very well. And although that might be probably one of the better sequences in the entire movie, and one I slightly cared about a little more, it felt a little too comic and silly. And certainly this does bring comic bookiness to a comic book movie, but that's something when people bring that to comic book movies, you get stuff like Joel Schumacher's Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, and Superman 3 is probably one of the earliest versions of that. Just when you had two films that took comic book logic seriously with Superman the movie and Superman 2, you get one that just like really ruins it and makes it feel stupid and silly. The end computer thing, it does make me think of if they're gonna have Brainiac, what that would have been like, and I think that's really the thing with Superman 3. Apparently Tom Mankiewicz was supposed to direct this. This was Richard Donner's choice to direct the third one, was Tom Mankiewicz. I feel like we would have had a much better Superman movie. This had the wrong producers in charge of it, really had the wrong kind of people, and the Superman Christopher Reeves franchise was maybe a little too ahead of its time. I don't really understand why they had Richard Pryor in this film. The Superman franchise wasn't doing that poorly. It's not like it needed a rebound. I really don't understand a lot of the motivations behind what they did, because like if they had just Richard Pryor as a sidekick and then had a supervillain, or they had just the computer thing, or they had just him becoming Dark Superman, but to have them all at once just feels like they really both didn't know what they were doing and didn't have any confidence in this franchise at all. So they just pushed through a ton of things and hoped it would work. It shows what Hollywood used to think of sequels, but also when you had people who used to really disregard sequels, but also like not even really understand the material they had, who would ever like this movie? I mean, it's so horrible and a mess and uninteresting. I mean, you could say all these ideas could be something interesting, but they're not. You could get into, yeah, what if Superman was evil instead of good? Yeah, that's interesting, but they don't do anything interesting with it. Same with the computer thing. Same with the idea of Richard Pryor's character, who could have been a supervillain. It's almost like they didn't understand the lessons of the other films. They just like really hated what Richard Donner had to do and were kind of like going off what they thought would work. This feels more like Roger Moore-ish Hollywood 70s, 80s tendencies that would frankly get overridden very quickly, even though this did come out right after Octopussy. This movie doesn't work at all. It's not interesting at all. It's a horrible, horrible Superman movie, and I can almost understand why Bryan Singer wanted to restart the whole thing from 2 when he made Superman Returns. This is probably why the public likes to forget about these films, because they like to forget they wasted their time watching a film like this. This kind of shows how Hollywood viewed comic book movies. They didn't really have people who could tackle them. Looking at Superman 3, I often thought about how video game movies are now. You have directors who don't really understand video games, don't play video games, and take the wrong lessons from them into cinema. This is the same way. They're taking all the wrong lessons from Superman. They're thinking of campy Silver Age stuff, but they're not thinking about how to really come up with a way to translate that to cinema. They're just kind of trying to transcribe it, not understanding their different mediums, and you have to do different things in those different mediums to get those ideas to work. Superman 3 was still early in the superhero genre and the comic book genre. Didn't really kind of take off in my mind until like the 2000s, and this shows the problem that they would all have until you started having like a Marvel Studios and directors who actually read comic books, like Sam Raimi and Jon Favreau, who understood the character and the best way to bring like Iron Man and Spider-Man to the big screen. And even though there might be problems with those films, they understand the characters a lot better, and that's a lot more entertaining to watch as a viewer when you actually care about the characters and you care about the idea of that superhero. With Superman 3, kind of just like Superman as a silly construct. When you can relate to those characters, when you can feel something, it means a lot more. But you can't really feel anything, including humor or any sense of being, while watching this movie, because it's just such a horrible train wreck of terrible ideas that just explodes into an acid rain cloud that'll just ruin the Superman franchise until Bryan Singer can come to it, and then eventually Zack Snyder. So I don't know if that acid rain cloud ever went away. I think it just keeps infecting us. You know, maybe a little less skin is falling off and we're healing a little bit more. I think even though most most people who saw this won't forget it because it was so painful to get through. They try to forget it pretty easily because it's fairly unmemorable. It's kind of so unmemorable, it's almost memorable, but then you realize how unmemorable it is, and you just simply forget it and move on. And I think I'm going to take a lesson from pop culture and the movie-going audience in general and just stop talking about this movie forever. So if you have seen Superman 3 and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. And check out my Superman movie reviews playlist. I have the previous 2 Superman movie reviews in there, as well as reviews of the Fleischer Superman and Famous Studios Superman series. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.